tonight we find ourselves on the vast, silent expanse of the Mongolian steppe, a sea of wind-rippled grass that stretches to the edge of the world beneath a sky so immense you feel you could fall into it. The air is thin and sharp in your lungs, carrying the scent of cold earth and distant snow. A relentless wind, the eternal breath of this land, tugs at your clothes, a constant reminder that this environment tolerates no weakness. You pull your jacket tighter, a flimsy modern barrier against an ancient cold that has shaped empires. It's in this moment of stark vulnerability that you realize the single most crucial element for survival here isn't a weapon or a fire, but something far more humble: shelter. And not just any shelter, but one born from the very animals that roam these plains. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are not a tourist here. You are a participant in a drama of survival that has played out for millennia. To your left, a herd of sheep huddles together, their thick, matted coats looking like dirty clouds anchored to the earth. This wool, this seemingly mundane fluff, is the gold of the steppes. Without the knowledge to transform it, you are just another mammal shivering in the wind, and you probably won't survive the winter. This is the reality that forged the Mongols, the reality that made the felt GR, the Yate, not just a home, but a movable fortress. Your mind begins to shed its modern clutter, focusing on the elemental needs: warmth, shelter, community. The knowledge you are about to uncover is woven into the DNA of a civilization, starting with the very ground beneath your feet. This landscape is not empty, it is full of a demanding presence. The grass, the chi, is short and tough, perfect for the hardy sheep and horses that are the lifeblood of the nomads. You learn quickly that the historical fact you took for granted, that the Mongols were nomadic herders, is a gross oversimplification. They were master ecologists, understanding the delicate balance of this ecosystem with an intimacy that modern agriculture has largely forgotten. They moved with the seasons, not out of whimsy, but to prevent overgrazing, to allow the land to breathe and regenerate. Their entire society, from their diet to their deities, was built around this symbiotic relationship with their animals. The sheep provided meat and milk, but their wool, specifically the coarse, durable outer coat, was the raw material for the fabric of their lives. The highest quality wool for traditional felt making often came from sheep that were, well, a bit stressed. The constant movement, the harsh winds, the dramatic temperature shifts, this difficult life actually produced a denser, more resilient fiber. A pampered sheep in a tranquil meadow might have been softer to the touch, but its wool lacked the structural integrity needed for a GER that could withstand a Zud, the brutal winter storms that can wipe out entire herds. You're looking for the survivors, the tough ones. Their wool tells the story of their struggle, and that story is what makes the best felt. Historians still argue whether the Mongols invented felt making or simply perfected an art they discovered from earlier steppe cultures like the Xiongnu or the Scythians. The evidence is as fragmented as ancient pottery shards buried in the permafrost. What is undeniable is that under the Mongols, felt reached its apogee, becoming the literal and figurative fabric that held a continent-spanning empire together. It was the material that allowed an army to move with stunning speed, carrying their homes on their backs. As you stand there, feeling the immense pressure of the sky and the whisper of the grass, you begin to understand that you are not just learning about a craft. You are learning the first chapter of a survival manual written in wool and water, a chapter that begins with a simple, profound discovery lost to the mists of prehistory. That first, life-saving discovery of felt was almost certainly an accident, a beautiful, messy serendipity born from necessity. Picture this: you're one of those early steppe dwellers, maybe from a tribe long forgotten by the history books. You've just sheared your sheep, and you've piled the raw, greasy wool into a heap, intending to use it as stuffing for your leather boots or perhaps as a simple blanket. It's not a comfortable life. You sleep on the ground, and the damp chill of the earth is a constant companion. One night, a storm rolls in, and in your haste to secure your camp, you leave that pile of wool out in the rain. The next morning, it's a sodden, flattened mess. You're annoyed, probably cursing the sky spirits under your breath as you try to pull the matted clump apart. But then you notice something. The wool has changed. It's no longer a loose collection of fibers. It's a coherent sheet, denser, tougher. And when it dries, it's surprisingly windproof. A light goes on in your head, a spark of pure, unadulterated genius. You've just stumbled upon the fundamental principle of felting, all because you were a bit careless with the weather. This is the aha moment that would echo for thousands of years. There was no grand design, no committee meeting. It was simple cause and effect, observed by someone sharp enough to connect the dots. Wool fibers are covered in tiny, microscopic scales. When they are dry, these scales lie relatively flat. But when you add heat, moisture, and agitation, like, say, a torrential downpour followed by you stomping around your camp in a frustrated rage, those scales open up. They lock onto each other, tangling and twisting and hooking together in an irreversible embrace. The more you agitate them, the tighter they cling, until the individual fibers surrender their identity to become a single, unified fabric. You've effectively invented a textile without ever learning to weave or spin a thread. It's a cheat code for cloth, and you've just unlocked it. Now, let's get our hands dirty, or rather, woolly. You're not just observing this discovery, you're replicating it. You take a handful of that raw, freshly shorn wool. It's greasy to the touch, thanks to the lanolin, a natural wax produced by the sheep. This isn't a flaw, this is the secret ingredient. That lanolin is nature's own waterproofing agent and lubricant, and it will be crucial later. The wool itself is a mix of textures. There's the coarse, long outer hair, called the kemp, which is stiff and weather-resistant. Then there's the softer, crimped, and warmer undercoat, the true wool. A mainstream historical fact you're now appreciating firsthand is that early pastoral societies didn't separate these fibers with the precision of a modern textile mill. They used it all, creating a felt that was both sturdy and insulating, a perfect reflection of the waste not, want not ethos required for survival on the steppe. Some anthropologists theorize that the very first felt might not have been made by humans for themselves at all, but for their horses. Imagine a nomadic rider, trying to protect his prized steed from saddle sores. He might have thrown a wool pad under the saddle, and after days of riding through rain, sweat, and the constant pressure of the rider's weight, that pad would have felted itself perfectly to the shape of the horse's back. The horse got a custom-fit saddle blanket, and the rider got another glimpse of this magical process. It's a fun, slightly absurd image. The entire Mongol Empire, in a way, built on the comfort of a horse's backside. Historians still argue whether the discovery of felt was a singular event that spread rapidly across the steppe or a simultaneous, independent revelation occurring in multiple places where humans and sheep coexisted in harsh climates. The conditions for felting are so basic, wool, moisture, movement, that it's entirely plausible that a mother in the Altai Mountains and a herder in the Carpathian Basin both had the same soggy, brilliant revelation within a generation of each other, never knowing of the other's existence. This wasn't a secret to be hoarded. It was a solution to a universal problem. As you look at that matted clump of wool in your hands, it no longer looks like a mistake. It looks like the first page of a blueprint, a rough, tangled, but undeniable promise of a warmer, more secure future. The genius wasn't in the invention, but in the observation. The real work was just about to begin. So now you have this revelation, this tangled, matted clue left by the rain. But you can't rely on the weather being sloppy on your behalf forever. To move from accidental discovery to intentional craft, you need to become a connoisseur of wool, a whisperer to the flock. Your eye, which once saw just sheep, now starts to see walking textiles, each with a coat telling a story of its life. You're not just grabbing any wool, you're curating it. The spring shearing is the harvest, and the quality of this harvest dictates the comfort of your entire year. You walk among the herd, your fingers running through the fleeces, feeling for the right combination of resilience and softness. You're looking for the Goldilocks zone of sheephood, not too coarse, not too fine, but just right for the formidable task of building a home. This is where you learn the first rule of Felt Club: not all wool is created equal. The most common and versatile wool comes from the native Mongolian sheep, a breed hardened by millennia of natural selection on this very plateau. Their wool is a perfect, balanced mix. The long, hairy guard fibers, the kemp, are your roof tiles and your raincoat, shedding water and resisting the abrasive force of the wind. The shorter, crimpier, and softer undercoat is your insulation, trapping countless pockets of air to create a barrier against the cold that would otherwise seep into your bones. You learn to skirt a fleece, to discard the dirtiest, most matted parts from the sheep's belly and legs, because felt, for all its ruggedness, has no room for laziness. A bit of dirt is one thing, a pile of thorns and dung is a structural weak point. You're not just cleaning, you're engineering. A mainstream historical fact you're now part of is the sheer scale of this raw material production. A single GR required the wool of many sheep. When you picture the armies of Genghis Khan, you imagine warriors on horseback, but for every warrior, there was a vast logistical tale of families, herds, and just moving with them. The felt that covered those mobile cities represented an immense investment in animal husbandry and labor. This wasn't a cottage industry, it was the steppes version of heavy manufacturing, and it all started with your discerning eye selecting the best fleeces from the spring shearing. The empire's mobility was, quite literally, built on the backs of its sheep. The very best wool for felt, they'll tell you, often has a slight, natural discoloration, a creamy, off-white hue rather than a stark white. They might say it carries more of the sheep's solder, its spirit, its vital force. The purely white wool, while visually appealing, was sometimes considered a bit less robust, a little too pristine for the brutal real world. There was a superstition that felt made from purely white wool was more susceptible to evil spirits or bad luck. It's a poetic, fringe belief, but it underscores a practical truth. The slightly darker, natural lanolin-rich wool was often denser and more durable. The nomads had a spiritual reason for a choice that material science would later confirm. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had a formal, codified system for grading wool like we have today, or if it was a knowledge passed down through generations by touch and sight, a purely experimental expertise. There were no written manuals, no quality control checklists. It was all stored in the memory of the elders, in the practiced hands of the felt makers. Was a fleece from the eastern steppes considered superior to one from the west? Did a particularly harsh winter produce a better fiber the following spring? These are the nuances lost to time, the silent knowledge that resided in the calloused fingertips of the artisans you are now beginning to emulate. With your raw material selected, the real transformation is ready to begin, starting with a thorough, and surprisingly symbolic, cleansing. With your carefully selected piles of wool at the ready, the next step feels almost like a purification ritual. You can't build a home from filth, so you must become a laundress of the steppe, a master of suds and sludge. This isn't a delicate rinse, it's a battle against grime, and your weapons are warm water and your own brute force. You fill a large, shallow trough, perhaps a hollowed-out log or a leather basin, with water you've painstakingly heated over a fire. The steam rises into the cool air, a ghost of comfort in the harsh landscape. You plunge the first greasy, dusty fleece into the water, and the immediate reaction is a cloud of brown and green murk, the accumulated dirt of a year on the open range swirling into the water. The scent that hits you is profoundly animal, the raw smell of lanolin and earth, the very essence of the flock. This is where you truly understand the purpose of that natural wax you felt on the fibers earlier. The lanolin is a double-edged sword. You need to clean the wool, but you can't strip all the lanolin out. It's the magic that will help the fibers slide and lock during the felting process later. It's a delicate balance. You don't use harsh soaps, you use agitation. You push and pull the wool through the water, your hands and arms working in a rhythmic, almost meditative kneading motion. You're not just washing it, you're opening it up, allowing the scales on the fibers to relax and the hidden dirt to escape. You change the water again and again, watching it go from a thick, muddy soup to a slightly cloudy, finally clean state. The wool you pull out is transformed, lighter, fluffier, but still possessing that slight, waxy slickness that means you've done the job correctly. Once washed, the wool must be dried, but not completely. A mainstream historical fact you're engaging with here is the sheer volume of water and fuel required for this stage. For a single family preparing wool for a new GR, this was a communal, resource-intensive event. It required access to a reliable water source and a significant amount of dung or brush to heat that water. The location of a nomadic camp wasn't arbitrary. It was chosen with tasks like this in mind. As you spread the damp, clean wool on clean rocks or on frames of stretched rope to air dry in the wind, you're participating in an ancient logistical dance. This isn't a hobby. It's the foundational labor of a nomadic economy, the unglamorous underbelly of the majestic GR that will eventually stand against the sky. Some traditional felt makers believed that the final quality of the felt was influenced by the mood of the person washing the wool. They thought that frustration or anger, translated through rough, aggressive handling, could make the wool nervous and less likely to felt together harmoniously. There was a superstition that a calm, patient washer, singing or working with a peaceful mind, produced a superior, more cohesive felt. It sounds like pure folklore, but there's a sliver of practical truth buried in it. Aggressive, haphazard washing could felt the wool prematurely into hard, lumpy nodules within the fleece, creating weak spots. A gentle, methodical approach preserved the individual fiber integrity, setting the stage for a perfect, uniform felt later on. So, you check your temper at the trough. Historians still argue whether nomadic groups had designated washing stations at certain seasonal camps, specific river bends or hot springs that were revisited year after year for this exact purpose, their banks worn smooth by generations of felt makers. Or was it a more ad hoc process, done wherever the herd was gathered for shearing? The archaeological evidence is scant, as this process leaves behind no permanent structures, just the memory of suds in a stream. With your wool now clean, slightly damp, and smelling of nothing but itself, the next stage awaits, the fluffing. You can't lay it down in clumps. You need to tease it apart, to bring it back to a state of airy, cloud-like potential, ready to be tamed once again. You pick up your tools, perhaps two simple, curved sticks, and begin to card. Carding is the act of gentle untangling, a process of persuading the wool to forget its clumped-together past and embrace a new, orderly future. The tools are simple: two paddles, often just pieces of flat wood, studded with slightly bent metal teeth. You take a small handful of the washed, slightly damp wool and place it on the teeth of one carder. Then, with a gentle, raking motion, you pull the other carder through it. The sound is a soft, rhythmic shish-shish, a whisper of preparation. You're not tearing the fibers, you're combing them, aligning them, teasing out the last bits of vegetative matter your washing missed, and transforming the dense tufts into a light, airy roll of fluff called a bat. This bat is the fundamental building block of your felt. the individual brick that will be laid into the wall of your future home. There's a hypnotic, almost zen-like quality to this work. Your shoulders relax into the repetitive motion. Shish shish. The pile of raw clumps diminishes, and beside you grows a stack of these perfect, cloud-like bats, each one a promise of warmth. You learn the pressure required, too gentle, and the fibers remain crossed and tangled, too harsh, and you risk breaking them or felting them prematurely on the carders themselves. It's a dance of tension and release. As you work, you might mix different types of wool from your curated selection, blending a bit of the tougher outer coat with the softer undercoat to create a bat with the perfect balance of strength and insulation. You are, in this moment, a composer, and the wool is your orchestra, each fiber a note you are aligning into a harmonious chord. A mainstream historical fact you're embodying here is the deeply gendered nature of this craft. While the men handled the heavy labor of herding, shearing, and the later stages of fulling, the arts of carding and the initial laying out of the felt were often, though not exclusively, the domain of women. This was knowledge passed from mother to daughter, a quiet power held in their hands. The quality of the carding directly influenced the quality of the final felt. Any lumps or unevenness would become weak points. The entire family's comfort through the winter literally rested on the skill and patience demonstrated in this very task. The shish-shish of the carders was the sound of security being woven, strand by strand. The best carders, it was said, were broken in by a master. The teeth needed to have just the right amount of spring, a flexibility that came from years of use. A brand new, overly stiff carder could be too aggressive. Some artisans would even lightly rub the teeth with a bit of fat or oil, not to lubricate them, but to ensure the wool fibers slid off them easily and didn't cling. It was a subtle art, tuning your tools, and it was believed that a well-loved pair of carders became an extension of the felt maker's own hands, understanding the wool almost intuitively. You're not just using a tool, you're partnering with it. Historians still argue whether the specific patterns in which the carded bats were later laid down held symbolic meaning or were purely practical. Were certain layouts believed to bring good fortune or ward off spirits? Or was the primary concern simply achieving uniform thickness and strength across the entire sheet of felt? The silent language of these internal structures is lost to us, known only by the feel of the finished product. With your stack of perfect, airy bats ready, the real architecture is about to begin. You move to a large, flat piece of canvas or leather spread upon the ground, your work surface, and you begin the process of building, layer by meticulous layer, the skin of your shelter. The canvas before you is your blank slate, the ground upon which your mobile fortress will be sketched in wool. This is not a haphazard tossing of fluff. It is a deliberate, architectural act. You pick up your first carded bat, that light, airy roll of aligned fibers, and you begin to pull it apart, stretching it gently and laying it down in a thin, even layer. The fibers cross and overlap, creating a delicate, gossamer sheet. This is your first stratum. You work from the edges inward, ensuring the thickness is consistent, a perfect rectangle of potential. But one layer is nothing. It would tear at the slightest provocation. So you take another bat, and you lay a second sheet on top, but this time, you orient the fibers perpendicular to the first layer. You are creating a cross-hatched pattern, a gridlock of wool that will become immensely strong once felted. Layer by patient layer, you build this woolen sandwich. The number of layers determines the final thickness and weight of your felt. For a GER cover, you might build up 8, 10, or even 12 layers, a veritable quilt of unsculpted wool. Your back begins to ache from the constant bending, your focus narrowed to the emerging rectangle on the canvas. You are building a textile from the ground up, and the precision of this stage is everything. A thin spot will become a leak. A thick lump will be a failure point. You run your hands over the surface constantly, your fingertips your only calipers, feeling for any inconsistency, any deviation from the perfect, fluffy plane you are trying to create. This is the foundation, and like any good foundation, it cannot be rushed. A mainstream historical fact you are replicating is the communal scale of this endeavor. For a GER cover, the felt sheet being created is massive, far too large for one person to handle alone. This is a team effort. While you lay down one section, other members of your family or community are working on adjacent areas, ensuring the entire sheet is uniform. There is a quiet, focused energy to the work, punctuated by the occasional murmured instruction or shared joke. The size of the felt was directly tied to the size of the GR, which itself was a reflection of family size and social status. A larger, multi-section jar meant more felt, more layers, and exponentially more labor. You weren't just building a wall, you were building a social unit. Some felt makers would intentionally incorporate a single, symbolic bat of wool from a specially revered animal into the central layers, perhaps the first lamb of the season or a sheep that had survived a terrible winter. This bat, invisible in the final product, was thought to imbue the entire felt with that animal's luck or resilience. It was a hidden prayer woven into the fabric of the home, a spiritual keystone. Others might whisper a blessing over the layers as they were built. It was a way of sanctifying the practical, of reminding everyone that they were not just working with wool, but with the spirit of the flock that sustained them. Historians still argue whether the specific number of layers used in historical GR felts was standardized or varied wildly from tribe to tribe and family to family. Was there an ideal thickness-to-weight ratio that was discovered through trial and error and passed down as dogma? Or was it always a matter of "this feels right," dictated by the available wool and the anticipated severity of the coming winter? The answer is lost in the felt itself, a secret held between the countless layered fibers. Once the final layer is placed, the delicate, towering stack of loose wool is terrifyingly fragile. A strong gust of wind could ruin it. The next step is to secure it, to begin the process of convincing these separate layers to become one. And for that, you need to roll it all up and introduce it to its oldest enemies: water, heat, and pressure. The great roll-up is a moment of high-tension choreography. That massive, fluffy, and terrifyingly fragile woolen rectangle you've just built now needs to be transformed into a manageable package. You can't just grab an edge and pull. It would disintegrate into a sad, fluffy avalanche. So, you and your team gather around the edges of the canvas. With a series of coordinated, gentle lifts, you begin to roll the entire assembly, wool layers and the canvas beneath them, around a central pole. This is not a tight burrito. It's a loose, careful cylinder, a giant woolen jelly roll that contains the blueprint of your future home. The goal is to keep the layers perfectly aligned, preventing them from shifting and creating thin spots. Every pair of hands is crucial, a human cradle for the unborn felt. The roll, once complete, is colossal and surprisingly heavy, a dense log of potential. Now, the real magic, and the real labor, begins. You've assembled the ingredients, and now you must cook them, but your oven is kinetic. You tie the giant roll securely with long leather straps. Then, you and your team take hold of the ropes attached to either end. The initial stage is a gentle, rhythmic rocking. You pull the ropes back and forth, causing the roll to rock on the ground. This is the first introduction of agitation, waking the fibers up, getting them accustomed to movement. After a few minutes of this, you progress to rolling. You pull the ropes, dragging the heavy roll across the ground, then you walk it back. Forward and back, forward and back. It's monotonous, grueling work. Your muscles burn, and you start to sweat despite the cool air. This is the agony part of the process your ancestors named, the sheer, physical exertion required to birth the felt. A mainstream historical fact you're experiencing is the invention of portable, human-powered industrial machinery. This rolling log, dragged and manipulated by teams of people, was the nomad's factory. There were no water wheels or steam engines, just coordinated human strength applied with intelligent technique. The scale of this operation for an entire GER cover was immense, often requiring the coordinated effort of an entire extended family or small community for hours. It was a social event, a shared burden that reinforced communal bonds. The success of one family's felt was the success of the whole group, as they would all rely on each other for shelter and survival on the trek ahead. Some traditions held that the direction of the rolling mattered. Always roll towards the center of the camp, or always with the sun's path across the sky, never against it. It was believed that rolling against these natural flows could create unlucky felt, prone to tearing or leaking. There was also a very practical, if unspoken, rule. Don't let the children or the clumsy uncle near the ropes during the most critical, initial rolls. One sharp, jerky pull could misalign the entire internal structure, creating a weak seam that would haunt you during the first blizzard. The process required a steady, metronomic rhythm, a collective heartbeat. Historians still argue whether the specific duration and intensity of this rolling phase were carefully calibrated secrets, passed down as precise recipes. Roll for the length of time it takes to sing 3 epic poems, for instance. Or if it was purely a tactile decision, stopped only when the master felt maker judged the initial bond between the layers to be sufficient by the feel and sound of the roll. As you drag the heavy bundle back and forth, you begin to feel a change. The soft, muffled sound of loose wool shifting inside gives way to a denser, duller thud. The roll becomes firmer, more solid. The separate layers are starting to commit to each other, to entangle. But this is just the beginning of the bond. The initial, loose connection has been made, but the felt is still weak, like a promise not yet kept. It's time to introduce the elements that will seal the pact: hot water and the full, focused power of your community. The initial rolling has created a tentative bond, but the felt is still just a loosely consolidated blanket, far from the tough, weatherproof hide it needs to become. Now, you introduce the catalyst that will trigger the final, irreversible transformation: hot water. You unroll the giant cylinder just enough to expose the top surface. Others in your team bring buckets of heated water, not boiling, but hot enough to make you flinch when you test it with your fingers. This is where the process becomes steamy, loud, and intensely communal. You pour the water slowly and evenly over the entire surface of the wool, using a ladle or a simple cup. The dry, matted wool hisses as it drinks the moisture, the sound of thirst being quenched. The steam rises in great clouds, carrying the rich, wet sheep scent of lanolin, a smell that means home is being born. With the wool thoroughly saturated, you re-roll the felt, tighter this time, creating a hot, wet, and heavy package. Now, the real fulling begins. This is no longer about dragging. It's about pounding, kneading, and compressing. The most common method, one you've likely seen in vague historical sketches, is fulling by foot. You and several others, holding onto a rope strung overhead for balance, use your bare feet to rhythmically kick and roll the log back and forth. It's a bizarre, almost primal dance. Your feet, sensitive at first to the heat and the rough texture of the canvas, quickly grow numb to everything but the rhythm. Push, roll, kick. Push, roll, kick. It's exhausting, a full-body workout that leaves your legs trembling and your back slick with sweat. The sound is a wet, sloshing thump thump thump, the heartbeat of the craft. A mainstream historical fact you're participating in is one of the earliest forms of industrial collaboration. This fulling stage was so physically demanding that it blurred the lines of traditional gender and age roles. While women often led the carding and laying, this phase required all available hands and feet. Men, women, even older children who could keep their balance would join in. It was a noisy, messy, and strangely joyful event. Songs were sung to keep the rhythm, stories were shouted over the sloshing, and the shared exertion forged a tangible connection not just between the fibers, but between the people creating them. The felt was quite literally stamped with the collective effort of the community. Some believed that the best felt was fulled by the feet of a happy community. Arguments or resentment during the fulling process, they thought, would transfer a bitter spirit into the felt, making it brittle or prone to mildew. There was also a very practical, if unhygienic sounding, belief that the natural oils and salts from human sweat, mixing with the lanolin, somehow contributed to the felt's ultimate durability. It was an alchemy of human and animal perspiration. While modern science might scoff, the underlying principle, that prolonged, vigorous agitation in a hot, soapy, from the lanolin, environment is what causes felting, is perfectly sound. Your aching legs are a testament to that. Historians still argue whether different tribes had specialized fulling songs or chants with specific rhythms designed to optimize the process. Were there fast-paced songs for the initial, aggressive fulling and slower, more deliberate chants for the final tightening? Or was it all ad-libbed, a cacophony of shouts and folk tunes that just helped pass the time? The specific soundscape of the fulling yard is lost to us, replaced by the silent evidence of the finished product. As you work, you feel the roll changing under your feet. It's shrinking, becoming denser and more solid. The sloshing sound diminishes, replaced by a firm, resistant thud. The fibers have locked. The separate layers have vanished, merged into a single, coherent fabric. The transformation is nearly complete, but the final, precise form has yet to be decided. The felt has found its strength, but not yet its shape. The moment you stop the frantic dance of fulling, a new, more delicate phase begins, the art of controlled shrinkage. You unroll the felt for the final time. It's hot, steamy, and has transformed from a fluffy rectangle into a thick, dense, but still vaguely defined sheet. It's like a piece of clay that has been vigorously wedged. The material is unified, but the final form is still malleable. This is where precision takes over from pure power. The felt is now in a highly suggestible state, and you must guide it to its exact final dimensions and thickness through a process of stretching, pulling, and meticulous shaping. You and your team take the edges, and with a coordinated heave, you lift the heavy, wet mass and begin to stretch it carefully. This isn't a wild tug-of-war, it's a calibrated pull. You are fighting the natural tendency of the wool to shrink and curl, convincing it to lie flat and even. You measure it against a pattern laid on the ground, perhaps an outline drawn in the earth or on an old canvas. If it's for a GER wool, you are stretching it to a specific, curved shape. If it's for a blanket or a garment, you are ensuring the edges are straight and the thickness uniform. You use your hands, your elbows, even your knees to press and smooth the surface, working out any final wrinkles or thick spots. Any imperfection you leave now will be permanent, baked into the fabric as it dries. This is the felt maker's final edit, the last chance to correct any mistakes before the text becomes immutable. A mainstream historical fact you're engaging with is the concept of fulling as a specialized trade in many parts of the world. In medieval Europe, fullers were a powerful guild who used large water-powered hammers to pound woolen cloth. Here on the steppe, you are the guild, the hammer, and the master craftsman all in one. The controlled shrinkage you're managing is a critical calculation. Felt can shrink by up to a third of its original size during the fulling process. This means the initial wool sandwich you built had to be significantly larger than the final product needed to be. This required advanced spatial reasoning and experience, a knowledge of exactly how much this particular batch of wool would contract under this specific amount of agitation. It was a science learned through doing, not through books. Some artisans believed that the final character of the felt was set by the weather in which it dried. A felt that dried slowly under a gentle sun was thought to be more supple and durable, having been blessed by the sky. A felt that was rushed, dried too quickly near a fierce fire, or was caught in a sudden downpour was considered anxious or weak-spirited. There was also a very practical technique of rubbing the surface with smooth, cold stones as it began to dry. This polished the outer layer, helping to seal it against the wind and rain, and was said to give it a beautiful, slight sheen, like the coat of a healthy animal. Historians still argue whether the final sizing and shaping of GER felts were standardized to modular dimensions, allowing for the replacement of sections from one GER to another, or if each felt was a custom fit for a specific, uniquely sized frame. Was there a degree of interoperability in this nomadic world, or was every GR cover a bespoke creation, intimately tied to its wooden skeleton? The evidence suggests a mix. Basic proportions were likely common, but the final fitting was always a custom job. Once the felt is stretched to its perfect dimensions, it is pegged down or weighted at the edges and left to dry completely in the sun and wind. The transformation is over. What was once a pile of dirty fluff is now a rugged, weatherproof skin, ready to serve. But for now, it rests, a grey-brown sheet baking in the sun, its journey from chaos to order complete. The felt that dries before you is a triumph of function, a slab of resilient, grey-beige fabric that will deflect wind and insulate against cold. But the human spirit, even on the harsh steppe, yearns for more than mere utility. It craves beauty, identity, a splash of color against the endless green and gold. So, before this new felt is cut and stitched into its final duties, you might embark on the final alchemy, dyeing. This isn't a trip to a modern art store. This is a foray into the landscape itself, a gathering of roots, leaves, bark, and minerals. You become a dyer, a chemist whose laboratory is the steppe and whose recipes are older than memory. You start with the most common and revered color, the deep, warm, earthy brown. For this, you gather the outer bark of the willow tree, or perhaps the hulls of walnuts if you've traded for them. You build a fire under your largest pot, a cast iron cauldron that is one of your community's most prized possessions. You fill it with water and your gathered dye stuffs, creating a murky, unassuming soup. As it boils, the water slowly transforms, turning a rich, chocolatey brown. The smell is tannic and earthy, like wet autumn leaves. You add your piece of undyed felt, which first must be treated with a mordant, a fixative. Here, your options are brilliantly primitive, alum if you have it, or more commonly, the acidic whey left over from making cheese, or even simple, iron-rich mud. You submerge the felt into the boiling cauldron, and you wait, patiently stirring it with a long stick as it soaks up the color. A mainstream historical fact you're tapping into is the Silk Road's role as a conduit for more than just silk. While the Mongols were famed for their practical goods, they were also part of a vast network of cultural exchange. Through trade, they gained access to more exotic dyes, the vibrant vermilion made from cinnabar, the prized indigo blue from the south, or even the precious saffron yellow. A brightly colored felt, especially one used for interior decoration or ceremonial wear, was a sign of wealth and connection to a wider world. The colors you could produce were a direct reflection of your place in the web of Eurasian commerce. The most vibrant and color-fast reds were notoriously difficult to achieve. One method involved using a dye made from the dried bodies of a specific species of insect, the Polish cochineal, which infests the roots of the knapweed plant. The process was secretive and time-consuming. There was a superstition that the dye vat for red had to be stirred only sunwise, and only by a woman, or the color would tone out weak and cowardly. A successful batch of true red felt was a cause for celebration, its color seen as capturing the very essence of life, fire, and power. It was a color worthy of a Khan. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had a sophisticated color symbolism encoded into their felt work, or if the choice of color was largely pragmatic and aesthetic. Was a blue GER cover associated with the sky god Tingri? Was a specific pattern of colored felt strips on a GER an indicator of a family's lineage or tribal affiliation? The evidence is fragmentary, gleaned from the accounts of travelers who often described the visual splendor of Mongol camps without fully understanding the language of their palette. As you pull your now richly brown felt from the dye pot, rinsing it in cold water until the runoff runs clear, you see it anew. It is no longer just a functional material, it is a statement. It carries the color of the earth, the memory of the willow tree, and the skill of your hands. It is a piece of the steppe, refined and beautified. This colored felt is now ready to be tailored into the specific objects that define nomadic life, from the clothes on your back to the very roof over your head. With your finished felt, whether in its natural, sun-bleached state or dyed the color of earth or sky, you now hold the nomadic equivalent of a blank canvas, a sheet of steel, and a block of wood all in one. This is the moment of fabrication, where you become a tailor, a saddler, and a carpenter, all while wielding a simple, heavy needle and tough sinew thread. Your first project might be for your own body, a pair of sturdy boots. You trace the outline of your foot onto the felt, cut out two identical shapes, and then skillfully stitch them together, creating insulated footwear that will silence your steps on the frozen ground and keep the dampness at bay. The process is slow, the push and pull of the needle through the dense material a test of finger strength, but the result is a perfect, custom fit. But your needs extend far beyond your feet. You fashion saddle blankets, thick pads that protect your horse's back from the chafing of the wooden saddle frame. You create bags of all sizes, from small pouches for your flint and steel to massive sacks for transporting grain or salt. You cut and stitch winter hats with A-flaps, and heavy coats that reach your knees. Every snip of the shears and every pull of the sinew thread transforms the large sheet of felt into a specialized tool for survival. There is no waste. The smaller offcuts aren't discarded, they are stitched together into patchwork items or used as padding inside other garments. In a world where every resource is hard-won, frugality is a form of genius. A mainstream historical fact you're embodying is the concept of the mobile workshop. A Mongol camp was not a primitive settlement. It was a highly efficient, decentralized production center. Every family unit possessed the skills and tools to maintain and reproduce its entire material culture from the resources provided by its herd. The felt making, the leatherworking, the metal smithing, it all happened in situ, allowing for immediate repair and adaptation. The speed of the Mongol military machine was, in part, due to this self-sufficiency. A soldier could have his torn felt boot resoled or his worn-out saddle pad replaced overnight, without ever needing to visit a stationary market or artisan's quarter. The very best felt garments, especially those meant for long journeys or harsh weather, were sometimes oiled not with more lanolin, but with animal fat, like mutton tallow. This created an almost impermeable, if slightly pungent, barrier against wind and water. There was a belief that a well-greased felt coat, broken in by weeks on horseback, developed its own unique spirit and would remember the shape of its owner, becoming more comfortable and protective over time. It was less a piece of clothing and more of a second, weathered hide. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized kit of felt items that every Mongol warrior or family was expected to possess, or if the inventory was as fluid and adaptable as their lifestyle. Did every archer carry an identical felt quiver? Was there a prescribed method for stitching the seams of a GER cover to maximize waterproofing? The answers are as varied as the individuals who lived this life, their personal preferences and regional variations lost to time, leaving only the universal truth of the material's indispensable utility. With your personal gear sorted, your attention turns to the grandest project of all, the one that will use the vast majority of your carefully crafted felt, the construction of the GR itself, the felt-covered home that is the beating heart of nomadic life. The GR is not merely a tent, it is a perfect piece of engineering, a circular wooden lattice that unfolds into a sturdy wall, crowned by a roof ring held aloft by slender poles. But this elegant skeleton is just the beginning. It is the felt that gives it life, that transforms a framework into a home. You are now part of the raising crew. Once the wooden structure is assembled and lashed together with leather thongs, you and your community approach with the great felt covers. These are not one single piece, but a system, large rectangular sheets for the walls and segmented, wedge-like pieces for the roof. They are immensely heavy, and it takes coordinated effort to heave them up and drape them over the wooden frame, ensuring they overlap in the correct, storm-proof sequence. The final touch is the long, woven hair ropes that you wrap around the entire structure, cinching the felt tight to the wood like a belt. You pull with all your might, tightening the ropes until the felt is drum-taut. This is the moment of truth. From the outside, the GER is now a low, white or off-white dome, looking for all the world like a soft, organic growth on the landscape. But step inside, and the magic reveals itself. The single shaft of light from the central smoke hole illuminates the spacious interior. The felt walls mute the howling wind outside to a distant whisper. The space is warm, surprisingly bright, and instantly comfortable. You have just erected a climate-controlled, hurricane-resistant, and fully portable house in a matter of hours. A mainstream historical fact you're experiencing is the GER's role as a microcosm of the Mongol worldview. Its structure was a map of the universe. The central fire was the axis mundi, the connection between earth and heaven. The smoke hole was the eye looking to the sky, and the interior space was divided into specific sections with strict social and spiritual significance. The north side, opposite the door, was the place of honor for guests and the family altar. The felt walls were the boundary between the ordered, domestic world inside and the chaotic, powerful forces of nature outside. Living in a GR was to be constantly reminded of your place in a vast, cosmic order. Because of the lanolin and the density of the material, the GER had a distinct, not unpleasant smell, a mix of wood smoke, and dried dairy products. It was the smell of safety, of family. And on a quiet night, if you pressed your ear against the felt wall, you could hear the outside world with a strange clarity, the crunch of a footstep, the bleat of a sheep, as the taut skin of the GER acted as a giant sounding board, connecting you to your environment even as it protected you from it. It was a living, breathing entity. Historians still argue whether the efficiency of the GER and its felt covering was a key strategic advantage that has been underestimated in military history. The ability to house an entire army in warm, dry quarters every night, to carry a city on the backs of oxen, gave the Mongols a logistical resilience that their enemies, reliant on foraging and sleeping in the open, could scarcely comprehend. Was the humble felt GR, in fact, one of the greatest secret weapons of the ancient world? As you sit inside, the wind humming against the walls you helped create, it doesn't seem like such a far-fetched idea. This home is more than shelter. It is a fortress, a temple, and a testament to a culture that mastered its environment. But the significance of felt runs even deeper, woven into the very spirit and soul of the people. Sitting inside your new GR, the fire crackling and the felt walls holding the outside world at bay, you begin to feel the deeper layers of this craft. This isn't just physics and animal husbandry, it's a sacred act. The very process of creating felt, of transforming chaos into order, of convincing countless individual fibers to unite into a single, strong whole, is a powerful metaphor for the community itself. The wool is seen as a gift from the spirit of the flock, and to work with it carelessly is an affront. Before a major felting project, a simple offering of milk or irag, fermented mare's milk, might be sprinkled upon the wall pile, a gesture of thanks and a prayer for success. The GER you sit in is not just a house, it is a consecrated space, and its felt skin is its holy vestment. This spiritual connection manifests in the symbols often applied to the felt itself. While the outer covers are usually plain for practicality, the interior felt linings, the curtains that divide the space, and the personal items like clothing and saddle blankets are where symbolism flourishes. You see the ulzi, the endless knot, symbolizing eternity and the interconnections of all things. You see the Tumen Nason, the swastika, an ancient solar symbol representing rotation, perpetual motion, and the power of the sun. These aren't mere decorations, they are prayers and protections woven, stitched, or appliqued onto the felt, turning everyday objects into talismans. The act of stitching a symbol onto a felt blanket is an act of weaving that prayer into the fabric of daily life. A mainstream historical fact you're touching upon is the deep-rooted shamanistic traditions of the steppe, which predated and coexisted with later adopted religions like Buddhism and Islam. In these animistic beliefs, spirits resided in everything, in the sky, the mountains, the rivers, and the animals. The felt, born from the spirit of the sheep and transformed by the spirit of the community, was a potent medium. Shamanic drums, the very instruments used to journey between worlds, were often covered in felt, its sound-deadening properties perhaps helping to focus the shaman's mind, its organic origin connecting him to the natural world he was navigating. There is a belief that a GER's felt retains the emotional energy of the events that happen within it. A GER where a family has lived in happiness and health is thought to have warm or lucky felt, and these covers are highly prized, sometimes passed down through generations. Conversely, a GER that witnessed great strife or tragedy might have its felt replaced, the old covers burned or left on the steppe to release the negative energy. The felt is not an inanimate object. It is a witness, a recorder, a living skin that absorbs the story of the family it shelters. Historians still argue whether the symbolic patterns on Mongol felt and textiles constituted a formal, readable language with specific meanings known across the tribes, or if they were more akin to regional dialects of decoration, with symbols holding similar but not identical meanings from one valley to the next. Was an ulzi knot from the west understood in the same way as one from the east? The lack of written records from the Mongols themselves on this matter leaves it in the realm of interpretation, a silent visual language we can only partially decipher. As the fire dies down to embers, you feel the weight of this spiritual heritage in the very air, thick with the smell of felt and smoke. This profound connection to the unseen world would soon be stretched across continents, as the craft of the steppe became the fabric of an empire. The peaceful, spiritual atmosphere of your GR is a world away from the thunder of 10,000 hoofbeats, but the connection is direct and undeniable. The very felt that shelters you is the same material that allowed the Mongol Empire to explode across the globe with breathtaking speed. Picture the armies of Genghis Khan, not as a faceless horde, but as a moving nation. For every warrior on his hardy steed, there was a GR following on an ox-drawn cart, a compact home that could be erected in an hour on the frozen plains of Khwarezm or the grassy hills of Hungary. This was their strategic masterstroke. They never campaigned, they simply moved their entire civilization, with women, children, and herds, directly onto the battlefield. And at the heart of this mobile civilization was your craft, felt. The logistical advantage this provided cannot be overstated. While European knights or Chinese infantry relied on foraging, living in the open, or being billeted in often hostile towns, the Mongol warrior slept each night in a warm, dry, familiar home. He ate hot meals cooked by his family. His gear was constantly maintained and repaired. His morale, tethered to the comforts of home, remained high. The felt GR was a force multiplier. It was a barracks, a mess hall, and an army, all rolled into one portable package. The empire was built on the backs of horses, but it was housed in felt. The discipline required to build and break down a city of Ges daily was the same discipline that governed their battlefield maneuvers. A mainstream historical fact you're witnessing is the role of the Ordos, the great palatial tent cities of the Mongol Khans. These weren't simple Ges. They were vast complexes of massive felt pavilions erected for court ceremonies, housing officials, and impressing subject peoples and foreign ambassadors. Travelers like Marco Polo described them with awe, their interiors lined with the finest silks and furs, but their core was always the humble felt, now scaled to a monumental level. These Ordos were the mobile capitals of the empire, and their ability to appear, fully formed, anywhere on the steppe was a powerful demonstration of Mongol authority and organizational genius. Your craft had gone from a survival skill to an instrument of state power. Some accounts suggest that the Mongols may have used felt in their infamous siege tactics as well. It's their ice that dampened felt sheets, with their excellent fire-retardant properties thanks to the lanolin, could have been used to protect siege engines from incendiary arrows or boiling oil. There are even suggestions that felt, layered thickly, could be used as a form of improvised armor for siege workers or to muffle the sound of sappers digging under walls. Whether these theories hold water is debatable, but they speak to the material's incredible versatility in the hands of a resourceful and innovative military culture. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of the GER and felt-making technology by conquered peoples was a conscious policy of Mongolization, or a simple, pragmatic adoption of a superior technology. Did the empire actively encourage subject tribes to adopt the portable felt home to facilitate control and movement? Or did people from Persia to Russia simply see a better way to live and copy it? The answer is likely a mix, but the result was the same. For a time, the felt GR became the ubiquitous symbol of power and mobility across Eurasia, a testament to the culture that perfected it. But empires are fleeting, and as the world changed, the dominion of felt would inevitably wane, facing its greatest challenge not from armies, but from the loom and the spinning wheel. The thunder of the empire eventually faded into the whispers of history, and the world began to spin on a new axis. The rise of settled agriculture, the Industrial Revolution with its clattering looms and spinning jennies, and the global trade in cheap, woven textiles like cotton slowly pushed felt to the margins. The GR remained, of course, a home for herders on the steppe, but the profound, all-encompassing knowledge of its creation began to fray. The younger generations were lured by the lights of the city, by jobs in mines and factories, by the convenience of buying a mass-produced coat instead of spending a week making one. The ancient rhythm of the carders, the communal exhaustion of the fulling dance, the alchemy of the dye pot, these things risked becoming museum pieces, the stuff of folk tales told by grandparents whose hands no longer smelled of lanolin. But the story doesn't end there. In the late 20th and now the 21st century, a quiet but determined renaissance began to stir. You see it in the workshops of Ulaanbaatar, where master artisans, often elderly women who are the last repositories of this deep knowledge, now teach eager young apprentices. You see it in cooperatives established in the countryside, where felt making is being revitalized not just as a cultural artifact, but as a sustainable, eco-friendly source of income. These modern felt makers are bridge builders. They honor the traditional methods, the hand carding, the rhythmic fulling, while also innovating, creating intricate contemporary art, high fashion items, and designer home goods that are finding markets in Paris, Tokyo, and New York. The very thing that made it obsolete in an industrial age, its handcrafted, natural, and slow quality, is now its greatest strength in a world hungry for authenticity. A mainstream historical fact underlying this revival is the broader global movement to safeguard intangible cultural heritage, championed by UNESCO. Mongolia's traditional craftsmanship of the GER and its associated felt-making techniques have received international recognition, providing a crucial platform and a sense of urgency to preservation efforts. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about recognizing that this knowledge represents a unique human achievement, a symphony of ecology, community, and craftsmanship that holds lessons for a sustainable future. The fight is to ensure it doesn't become a frozen-alized version of itself, but remains a living, breathing, and evolving craft. Some artisans are experimenting with incorporating other natural fibers from the steppe into their felt, like the incredibly soft undercoat of the yak or the fine hair of the camel, creating new textures and blends that even the ancient Mongols might not have imagined. There's a playful, innovative spirit alive, using Instagram and Etsy to sell the very same material that once built an empire. They are proving that felt isn't a relic, it's a language, and they are writing new poetry with it. Historians still argue whether this modern revival can truly recapture the deep, spiritual, and communal context in which this craft originally thrived, or if it will inevitably become a more commercial, individualized practice. Can the solder, the spirit, of the felt survive its translation into a global marketplace? The answer is being written now, in the hands of the new generation of felt makers, as they knead and roll and shape the wool, connecting threads to a past that is refusing to be forgotten. The journey of felt, from accidental discovery to imperial fabric to a symbol of cultural resilience, is a testament to its enduring power. It is a story not of loss, but of reclamation.